Directors, I think our clerk does that automatically, but Mark, thank you for bringing that out. Otherwise, I had a motion from Director Puckett. Is there a second? A second from Director Martinez. All in favor, say aye.
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 Any opposed? And we had the one abstention. Thank you, Mr. Murphy. All right, with any luck, we'll just keep rolling. You guys are doing wonderful this morning. Obviously did all your research. Joint board business. Item number 5, we're going to begin with item number 10, which is the Pacifica Building Boardroom Remodel Project, and I understand we have an update on that.
What's the process?
Good morning, Directors. I'm Colleen Franco, Manager of Contracts and Procurement. The agency received a protest regarding the anticipated award of the boardroom remodel project. As outlined in the contract's policies and procedures manual, the protester has 14 days from submittal of the initial notice of protest to submit a detailed statement of protest. Upon receipt of this information, or if no additional information is received by March 22nd, the CEO will review the findings and make a protest decision. Staff is requesting this item be continued to the April 14th Board of Directors meeting. Thank you.
Very good. Now, do we actually need to make a motion to have this continued?
I believe so,
Counselor?
yes.
All right, so I will entertain a motion.
I'll make a motion, we,
Oh, sorry, you go
Guys are
ahead.
So competitive, I love it.
Go ahead, Director Boyd, let him make the
Well,
motion.
I heard, Director Shea, I actually heard you first, and since
Yeah.
you were on our joint, we have a motion by Director Shea.
Second.
And a second by Director Voits. That counts for the Foothill Eastern. We need a second also for the San Joaquin.
I'll second it.
And a second from Director Davies, very good. Let us start with a vote for the San Joaquin Hills. All San Joaquin Hills members in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstention? That carries unanimously. For the Foothill Eastern, all in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? That carries unanimously as well. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
All right, that takes us to item number 11, the Financial Advisory Services. Ms. Potter, welcome.
Good morning, Amy Potter, Chief Financial Officer. This item is a request to execute a contract with Public Financial Management to provide financial advisory services. This item was presented to the Joint Finance and Investment Committee on February 24th, and the committee forwarded this item today to the board for approval. One of the reasons that we need to engage a financial advisor is that investment bankers acting as underwriters are prohibited from providing financial advice. So by engaging the financial advisor, we can work with the bankers, and that will be very important in these upcoming months and years. Also, the financial advisor has a fiduciary duty to the agencies. And so even though they are independent to the bankers and others who they are helping us review their work, they are working on behalf of the agencies. So part of the scope of services for this contract includes the ongoing financial advice, as well as assisting in all aspects of financing transactions, including developing our long-term financing plan for future financings, as well as just other needs with the agency. They also assist us with rating agency presentations, bond insurance information, and also working with our investors. They also help us evaluate various financing tools and other products that are presented to us, and assist us with our cash flows and our capital plans. Next slide. The agency issued a request for proposals, was posted on our electronic Planet Bids system in November of 2015. We received 4 proposals from the firms that you see here. And the proposals were evaluated based on this following criteria: that ability to provide objective financial advice, the experience and resources and qualifications, understanding of the scope of services, and specifically related to the agency's needs, the references, and their proposed fee schedule. The evaluation committee deemed PFM to be the best qualified based on all of those qualifications. Next slide. And the reasons that PFM really stood out in the evaluation is that really their understanding of the agencies and specifically the environment that the agencies are operating in. And this was discussed in length with the committee, and really the value of their knowledge and understanding of the agencies and that longevity. Also, something that has become very apparent to us is the need to have the depth of resources that a firm can provide, and that really stood out during the successful refinancing of over $3 billion of the agency's debt over the past few years. We were able to draw upon very high level and qualified individuals all throughout their firm within that transaction. Even when you get down to pricing the bonds, they have experts that can help advise us in that area. And then even when looking at various structured products that we may want to incorporate, they have a group that is, they're experts in that field as well. And even on the San Joaquin, where we had an arbitrage rebate situation, that was another area where they had experts who were there and able to assist us. PFM also provides services to agencies such as ours, and the largest one being the Bay Area Toll Authority. Slide. And so the recommendation today is to authorize the Chief Executive Officer to execute a 3-year contract with Public Financial Management for the Foothill Eastern. That amount is a not to exceed of $210,000, and for San Joaquin it's $120,000 plus not to exceed expense reimbursements of $38,000 for Foothill and $22,000 for San Joaquin. And they, their contract would be based on just the actual work they do at those hourly rates, so these truly are not to exceeds. We are also requesting authorization for the CEO to execute up to 3 one-year contract options without further board approval. And this is based on the anticipation of the need to have that consistency among the firm throughout the entire capital plan period, which we would expect to extend through that 6-year term. And so that concludes my report, and I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Very good. Thank you, Ms. Potter. Mr. Spitzer, you said you had a question.
First of all, I don't know why we even went out for bid. I mean, Rob's been doing this forever. He's been here since I was chairman in '98 or something, the San Joaquin. They've always been outstanding. So if you want consistency and now you're recommending 6 more years, why did we do this? Why didn't we just sole source it and go out and negotiate a rate?
I think we did see some value in just looking at other proposals and looking at other firms to see what they could offer. But after reviewing those proposals, we did come to that conclusion that just for those various reasons that value that they bring to the table, that PFM brings to the table, really just overwhelms the rest of the qualifications.
I can understand that. The concern I have is when you ask firms to go through all these steps and make these kinds of investments. They get the sense after a while that it's not a level playing field, so we actually hurt ourselves. Like in the areas where we know we have a service that's reliable and deliberate and we count on it, we have great relationships. Unless we're really trying to use this process to help us drive down our rate, like try to get a better rate with the consultant or use some kind of leverage. I just think it's not fair to all the other firms that are out there. I just think we should be really careful and utilize it when we believe it is actually a service we're looking for, we want competition or whatever. That being said, the rate though is asterisk between 225 and 350. So is it different for Rob and it's just like any other firm? Is principals at one rate and everything else? Has that been negotiated? Or
Yes.
will it be negotiated until later?
So the proposal actually included a range of 250 to 400. And even with those rates, we still deemed them to be the best qualified. But after determining that they were the best qualified, we did negotiate, and we negotiated those down to 225 to 350, which is really their current rate.
Okay, so this is the rate. Michelle was nice enough to point out on the second page of the valuation under contract notes, it shows the hourly.
Yes.
So is that relatively what they're at now?
Yes, yes. So that's not what they proposed. So even with the higher rates that they proposed, we still selected them as the best qualified. But after selecting them, we negotiated back down to their existing rates, which are shown there.
Okay. And then lastly, why would we want to lose oversight for 6 years on this contract? I mean, I think it sends a wrong message to the board that somehow we're not engaged in who our financial advisors are. I mean, typically you'd put a 3-year and then you'd have 1-year extensions and they have to come back to the board. It could be on consent, but at least it's there for us to, one, keep on our radar and our responsibilities as directors. 2, I think it lets us ask the kinds of questions that we're asking. And then as we get closer to the expiration of both the 3-year, we should be able to bring it back and say, well, how did they perform again during that 3-year? And oh, by the way, at every year juncture, what deals do we have? How have they performed on that deal? And it keeps this board in the mix. So I think 6 years without seeing it is way too long of a tether. My recommendation, and I have no problem moving it because I think Rob's outstanding and PFM's outstanding, is it would be 3 years in the initial, and then 1 year would have to return to the board for approval. And Mike, you can put it on consent, I don't care, but I don't want to lose track of it, so that would be my suggestion, Mr. Chairman.
I'll second that.
And I didn't catch the voice quick enough. Who seconded?
Christina Shea.
Thank you, Christina. All right, so we have a motion and a second for discussion purposes. I have Director Davies and Director Bartlett who wishes to speak.
Thank you, Ms. Potter. I'd like to jump on that. I as well agree with the 3-year term and then having it come to the board's approval for the next year. In regards to evaluation criteria, just one hint. Obviously, PFM did very well all the way through. Just a question in regards to the last one, proposed fee schedules and expenses. They actually came out fairly low. What were the reasons there?
It was strictly the rates that were proposed. However, one of the things that I think we really probably could consider or should consider is that because they are experienced, it's likely that they won't have to expend as many hours as the other firms. We didn't really take that into consideration much there with that score.
Very good. Director Bartlett.
I was on the ad hoc that approved PFM to move forward to the board. And I think, for openness and transparency in government, you have to go out, you have to test the market, and you have to see what's out there. So I think it was definitely appropriate to see what local firms might be able to provide services, what types of services, what rates they're charging, because that helps us balance with PFM. If we just have a sole source contract, basically we're going back to the vendor that we've had for 20-some years or 30 years and saying, well, just let us know what you want to charge, and because we don't have anything to compare it to. So by sending this out to an RFP, we're going to be able to get information back that we can utilize to negotiate the best deal for the agency, which is what we've done. Okay, so I thank Amy Potter for your great work, and I think we should move forward on this.
Okay. Director Mueller.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm new to this agency, and I'm looking at this evaluation, and I'm not familiar with PFM. But I do notice that they're the most expensive applicant on here. And I'm a little concerned that when I go back and I look at the criteria used, ability to provide objective financial advice, that's very broad. I'm not exactly sure what that means and what criteria you had within that. It concerns me that they weren't all able to provide objective financial advice. That's kind of a strange question to me. And so I'd like to see some more information on this. I mean, it's kind of a thin packet on how this decision was made. I understand PFM's been around a lot longer, or they've been here for a long time. They understand our organization and our goals. So I expect them to perform a little bit better in some of these criteria. But when I take a look at, well, let's just for an example, you have on the proposed fee schedule, they're 46, Feldman's a 37, but if I look at their hourly rates, they actually look like they're a lower cost solution. So I'm not sure how these numbers are coming about and what criteria you're using for that. I'd like to see a little bit more on that. I think we need a little bit more transparency here on how you actually made your decision, or how the ad hoc made the decision on going with PFM.
Okay, very good. Seeing no
Wait a
other...
minute, wait a minute. That deserves a response,
Okay.
okay? Because old timers like me who have been here for a couple decades on and off, you know, we may have a comfort level, like the chair, or excuse me, by Supervisor Bartlett, she's been the chair of the agency, and she's very, you know, a lot of us are really lucid in these areas because we've been doing this for so long. And so we have a comfort level, but we have to be cognizant and respectful of our colleagues who raise issues and want to understand it just as well as we might, because we can't just take it for granted, and we have to all row in the same direction if we can. So there's two major issues I think were raised. One was the not transparency, but how the criteria were determined and the rates, or excuse me, the rankings. That was one question raised. And then the other was explaining what they actually do, like the actual practical effect of the services they provide. And when a director raises that, then we have an obligation to pause, I think, and get that addressed. And so Amy could, I think, address both of those rather quickly and efficiently, but I just don't want to, I'm not comfortable, because I'm comfortable, if others want some, you know, answers to those questions. If I would just ask you to indulge a few minutes, Mr. Chair, on those questions.
And I appreciate that, and at the will of the council completely, I'd be happy to do that. But Mr. Bueller, in all respect, there are a lot of moving parts, and I think that that's good work that's done at the committee. And I think as brief of an answer as Ms. Potter might give probably would still be lacking to solve what you're looking for, really. So what I would encourage instead of that is just to take it offline and have the two of you perhaps, or a couple of us, be able to bring you up to speed. Because you're right, there are a lot of moving parts, and institutional memory is very important here. Okay, Director Bartlett says she has a 30-second answer. We'll see if we can get to the summary that way.
With regard to the firms, they're only as good as the principals and the staff members. And in taking a look at the qualifications of the principals that we'd be working with, Bob Rich and his staff, and looking at the expertise that they provide, the types of transactions that they have provided financial advice, and especially with transportation, you know, the transportation industry and transportation agencies like ours, major refinancings within the transportation industry. Bob Rich and his staff have really honed in and have kind of, is their core competency, that expertise. And so when you talk about general financial expertise, everyone in the financial field can provide a certain level of expertise, but when you're talking about transportation-specific transportation agencies, major refinancings within a transportation agency, that's where they excel over and above, you know, any of the other firms with their staff.
Mr. Chair, could I ask a quick question? Just to go to the point that was brought up here, number one, that the hourly rates are much higher for the firm we're moving on. And then if in fact the criteria was about transportation, why was that not the upfront question and not just a general financial question, but why didn't it just specifically state, to your point, that we're really looking for someone that has transportation background?
That was part of the criteria.
It was?
So yes, in the.
If I missed that, I'm sorry.
RFP, well, in the RFP, it's
Okay.
goes into a lot more detail, and so that is part of that qualification, is, it was transportation entities, it was the size of the transactions that they've completed, the complexity of the transactions, TIPIA experience. There were all kinds of, there were a lot more details in the actual RFP that goes
So
out.
these top 4 firms all complied with those general requirements. And then the second firm that was less expensive, can you just share with the next firm why they were not chosen? I mean, what was the differential? We're talking about, let me see, what's the First Southwest Company? I mean, that was the next 319 score, and the other one had 357.
It really, the experience and the types of transactions that they've completed were not as complex. Also, just the depth of resources, I think, would be the other key factor there.
What kind of resources?
Just all of the firm in general and everything that they could provide for our needs, especially if we get into another large transaction.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Director Hicks, then Director Voights.
Yeah, as to the actual cost, someone who has an unusual background immediately begins to understand the issue far in advance of someone else. So you're not paying for the person to learn the process, which is what you're doing almost everywhere else. The problem here is there are not a lot of transportation agencies such as this. Around the country, you may pick out a dozen or two, but that is a very specific entity. It's distinctive, and such as the people who want to bid on these things frequently don't have that highly specific experience. We are getting it cheaper because he will spend less time coming up to speed. So the actual hourly cost actually goes way down here.
Director Boyce, thank you.
I just want to say, I too think that, the 6-year window without coming back to the board, and thank you, Director Spitzer, for that. I think bringing it back to us to let us see, because volatility, market valuation and what the portfolio holds at that time. But, we're talking about the price here. The range, it may be a wide range, but the fact is the top tier of the dollars vary by $20. And so I think that, the honest numbers that will be being charged is a lot less because of the experience and the track record we have with the current provider.
Okay, thank you, Director Spitzer.
Where I think this firm has been really, really important, you need to see that they work on an hourly, not to exceed. When you go out to the market to borrow money, you're working with firms who, it's almost like a construction manager when you're building something. So they're our construction manager. They're there to make sure that the firms that are lending you money and doing the deals, they're incentivized and they make commissions. So where PFM is incredibly helpful to us is, honestly, these numbers are like budget dust when you talk about the value of a deal and what a basis point difference in a deal could be to the long-term debt of the agency. So when you look at these fees, it's minuscule compared to the service they provide on the value of a financial deal. So if you can if they can help you negotiate a rate with the firm when you're borrowing the money, they pay for themselves in spades. So it's as important as focusing on the hourly is, I want to make sure it's put in the context of the service they provide for the deals and the financings that we do and how important they are at those last minute moments. And if you've done these deals, and a lot of directors around this table have, with the staff over the years, that rate, what you finally negotiate your bond with, for example, man, when you're talking about $1 billion on a refi, 20 basis points, those are real numbers compared to. So I just wanted to give you that perspective of the service that Rob provides. He's there to help you strike the right deal on the long-term debt of this agency at the right time. And I'm not sure that kind of, that was really brought forward, I think, in the way that you're asking. So I just wanted to relay my personal experience, how important they've been at a critical time on a refinance.
So Joe, if I may, I encourage the two of you perhaps to take it offline. We end up having a lot more conversation, but do you get a sense for where things are?
Yeah, I mean, I understand why this firm was chosen. I do. But when you put these numbers out in the public and you start looking at the First Southwest Company, they didn't come in that far behind PFM. Their rate seems to be much lower. Texas is full of toll roads. I used to live in Texas, it's full of toll roads. So there are agencies just like this in Texas, and I would assume that these guys, but I don't know them. I don't know if they have any toll road experience, although you just said that they do because that was part of the RFP. So I would expect them to have this, and they shouldn't have to come up to speed. They should already be up to speed, they should know what they're doing. Now, they will have to come up to speed on what TCA is doing, and I understand, and that's why PFM should have an advantage. They've been here a long time. And getting back to how the rates are charged, I would assume the majority of this cost is going to be done by, the analysts and some other people. The partners don't typically spend the most time on these things. These other guys are doing that work. That was just my issue, is that I think if you're going to publish something like this, you need to have more documentation behind it on how you made a decision like that. When you look at the most expensive company being selected in a company that is not quite half the price, but substantially lower, was not selected. Now, going back to what Todd said, it hurts these other companies when they see us come in and we chose the most expensive firm, and these other three firms that came in with a lower price, it hurts us when we go out to bid like that. So the next time we have to do something like this, why would a firm come and bid when they take a look back and say, well, they're going to stay with the firm they had even though they're more expensive, we're just being exercised, why should we spend our time and resources on it? That was my concern. So, I'll acquiesce to our ad hoc committee on finance that they did their homework, but I'm more concerned about how this is presented to the public and the blowback that we could see from that.
And my style doesn't mean it's everybody's style here, but my style is the education, the learning curve that we all go through on every one of these agenda items happens in committee or happens off the dais. There's information that we get to receive over here, but hopefully we're doing that kind of learning early on. And Todd, thank you. It is difficult for new directors. This is a quick ramp up to be able to get in and figure out all the history. So I appreciate you rolling up your sleeves the way you have. But let's try to do most of our learning, I would hope, outside of the dais itself. Director Murphy, then I'm going to call the question after that.
I'm good. Well,
You're good. Okay, well, good. Well,
Mr. Chair.
Let me go ahead and call for the question, if I may.
Call the question's fine. Clarify the motion.
Absolutely.
It's 3 years plus 3 one-year extensions, which is staff recommendation from what I can tell.
But it's going to come back to the board rather than just not come back to the board.
The 1 year's come back to the board for, if nothing else, at least to consider.
Rather than having staff do it, and rather than having staff authorize it now, the difference is they have to bring it back.
They would have to bring it back to the board for authorization for each of the options. Exactly right. And for the record purposes, the motion by Spitzer, the second by Shea. Now let's start, see if we do this together completely. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Any abstentions? So carries unanimously both boards. Thank you very much, Amy. All right, the next item is item number 12, the traffic and revenue update. Mr. Lowe, welcome.
Good morning, I'm David Lowe, Acting Chief Engineer, and we're going to talk about traffic and revenue on both of the systems. I'll be giving you an overview of the toll system layout and talk about our toll rate structure. We have Stephen Avenshine from Stantec here in the audience who'll be talking about a review of the traffic and transactional toll revenue. And he'll answer any questions and answers. And then we'll talk about next steps as we go through the budget process. This is an overview of the 73, and I apologize to many of the longtime directors. I go through this occasionally every couple of years, and you'll see it, but I know it'll be a review for you, but for some of the newer directors, we thought it'd be worthwhile to walk through how the tolling system works on each one of the roadways. So as you're northbound on the 73, you're tolled at the off-ramps before the mainline toll plaza, but there's no toll as you get on the system in the northbound direction. As you go through the main line, you pay a toll at the Catalina View Mainline Toll Plaza. And north of the Mainline Toll Plaza, if you get on at the on-ramps, you're tolled at the on-ramps, but you're not tolled if you get off at the off-ramps. And the exact opposite is true in the southbound direction. You're tolled at the off-ramps as you get before the main line. You do pay at the main line if you pass through, and you pay at the on-ramps south of the main line. So you only pay once per trip, essentially, on the 73. Now, as we switch over to the Foothill Eastern system, it's not that simple. You can pay up to 3 times per trip on the Foothill Eastern system. So at the very southern end of the 241 at Oso, from there towards Antonio, you pay as you get onto the system. North of Santa Margarita, you pay as you get off the system. And it's the exact opposite in the opposite direction. You're paid, you're told as you get off onto Oso Parkway in Antonio. Over on the 261, you pay as you get off in the northbound direction, and you pay as you get on in the southbound direction. The same is true for the 133. And then we have main lines that are shown in the rectangular bars that cross the roadway. You pay at each one of those mainline toll plazas. So there is a place where you can pay 3 times. If you go through Windy Ridge, Tomato Springs, and get off at Oso Parkway or Antonio, you can pay up to 3 times on the Foothill Eastern system. So I'll talk a little bit about toll rate structure. We're a little bit different on each agency. As I said, you pay up to 3 times on Foothill Eastern, only once on San Joaquin. We have peak hour rates on the 73 at between 8 and 9 a.m. in the morning and 5 to 6 p.m. in the evening. The peak period is a shoulders of those times, and we have those on both the Foothill Eastern system at the main lines and at Catalina View as well. Weekend rates, we don't have weekend rates. They're the same as the regular rates on Foothill Eastern system. We do have special weekend rates on the 73. And off-peak and multi-axle policies are both the same for both systems. This is an overview of the revenue, and it's updated as of the end of January. So it's this year's revenue through January. And you see that 86% of the revenue, transactional toll revenue, is at the Catalina View main line, and about 14% is collected at the ramps, with El Toro and Newport Coast being the largest of those ramps. Over on the Foothill Eastern system, about 90% is collected at the mainline toll plazas, with Windy Ridge being the highest collection point. And then at the ramps, there's about 10%, and Oso's the largest, followed by Irvine East on the East Lake. So with that, I'd like to have Steve Abendschein come up, and he'll talk about this year's traffic and revenue results based on the last toll increase we have.
Okay, good. And as you're coming, Director Caruth has a question.
Question for you, Mr. Lowe. Has thought ever been given to hosting a range at the on-ramps? And obviously we can't have signs everywhere because, as we know, the rates fluctuate time of day, how we pay. But posting a range on the ramp itself, a stationary sign, is that a possibility, whether it's 50 cents to $10, just to let the public know for transparency, just giving the general public an idea of, gee, I get on this toll road, it could be 50 cents, it could be $10.
So there's advantages and disadvantages to that. If they see the higher rate, they might divert from the system, and they might not use the system. If you have a lower rate and they get charged more later, then they complain about that. But we are going to look at this in the next fiscal year, and we plan on looking at how we approach toll signage throughout the corridor system.
Thank you.
Okay, good. Stephen, welcome.
Good morning. So I'd like this to be as interactive as possible, so if you have any questions in the middle of the presentation, please feel free to interrupt me. You don't need to hold them until the end. So I just wanted to give an update on the entire toll system today. First, starting with kind of a background of the user base and the riders on both facilities. And then I want to talk about how the facility's done since the latest toll increase. Talk a little bit about how a traffic and revenue forecast is prepared and how toll elasticity theory operates. And then a little bit about what we're seeing as far as the economics in Southern California and how that's had an impact on toll road usage. So again, starting with the maps that Dave presented, first looking at the eastern system, and this basically covers the 241, the 133, and the 261. There's a very strong commuter base that uses these portions of the facilities. There's a very southbound AM peak as users come from the Inland Empire to employment centers in downtown Irvine and in Orange County. So you see, alternatives to this would be using the 91 or the 55, which are heavily congested, particularly during peak periods. So you see a lot of riders that choose to use a free flow trip on the toll facility in the southbound morning as they travel to work. A slightly different user base on the southern section of the Foothill Eastern. So on the Foothill section, there's a lot of housing density down in that southeastern portion of Orange County. Rancho Santa Margarita area that, again, is attracted to the employment centers in downtown Irvine and Orange County. So you actually have a northbound AM peak. So your peaks through your mainline plazas are actually different. The Tomato Springs is a northbound AM, southbound PM peak. Windy Ridge, Irvine Ranch, and Orange Grove all have a southbound AM, northbound PM peak. We do project some interesting growth on the Foothill. The large development that's occurring down south of Oso Parkway, obviously we expect to drive a lot of growth on the Foothill in the future. The user base on the 73 is a combination of longer distance trips, those that are basically using the 73 as an alternative between the 5 and the 405. But there's also some housing density in the southern portion of the 73 that uses the northbound direction to access dense employment up in the airport area or other sections up in near Costa Mesa. So you have a northbound AM and a southbound PM peak on the 73. So just a recap on July 1st of the past year, the following toll increases put into effect. All fast track rates were increased at both facilities by 2%, and there was a $1 discount that was maintained between fast track and non-fast track. So said oppositely, non-fast track users pay $1 extra compared to fast track. So before I get into the most recent response, I always think it's good to look at where the agency's been in its history. So I've got a chart here that basically shows the Foothill Eastern transactions over its life. And you can see from the early 2000s through the 2007 peak, you had a lot of very strong transaction growth as the economy expanded, everything was going well. And then as everyone knows, when the recession hit, there was a lot of contraction of the economy, housing prices, employment impacts, which caused a pretty substantial decrease in transactions on the facility. Coming out of the recession, we actually have seen two different periods. For the first 4 to 5 years after the recession officially ended, growth was pretty stagnant. It was positive, but not significantly. But what we've seen over the last 2 years has really been an economic resurgence. So while you look at the trend line that's shown there for the post-recession transactions looks somewhat level, if you compare the trend from the 2000s to what we've seen over the last 2 years, you can see they're very similarly sloped. So we are definitely entering a period here of economic expansion.
Steve, we can stop you for a second.
Sure.
Just a very quick question. As we all know, we're experiencing the gas prices are fairly low, and how, are we going to take that trend into effect? Because, I'm assuming that's not going to stay the way it is, and so it may change, and we may have a lot of people on the roads now, but, next year that may change. And so I'm just wanting to make sure that when these numbers do come out, and I'm assuming this is the month that probably would be even more skyrocket because the gas prices are even going lower. What are our projections, do we think, of the increase of actually people compared to last year to, say, the month of February?
Mm-hmm. Well, we do track month over month, and I think one of the interesting things, and I do talk a little bit about gas price impacts later in the presentation.
Okay.
But one of the interesting things to note is, you've really shown about 2 solid years of sustained growth on the facilities, and the gas price decrease has really occurred over the last 12 to 15 months. Now, that's not to say that the decrease in gas doesn't have an impact, because it certainly does. But what we found is that the gas price volatility is really what has a larger impact. So if we start to show a period of sustained lower rates, you will certainly see a bump in traffic. But unless those gas prices, suddenly rocket right back up to the $4 a gallon that we approached a couple years ago, you won't see an immediate impact. If there's a gradual rise in those gas prices, people feel it less than if you have these, wild swings in gas prices. If I could forecast the exact gas price for the next year, I'd probably be in a different job making more money. But it is something that we certainly take into account as we look at our projections, and it's something we have seen a short-term bump regarding. But I do think, its long-term impact on your facility is maybe not as substantial as you might think.
So good question. If I understood right, though, you plan on answering it anyway. So
That's
you
correct.
encourage us to interrupt. I'm going to discourage us from interrupting. We'll finish the flow of the presentation and we'll reserve our questions. So please continue.
Sure. So looking at the similar trends, but turning to Foothill Eastern revenue. So again, you can see a period in the 2000s with very strong revenue growth. And again, similar to the transaction loss, you can see that revenues decreased during the recession. One of the things that's interesting to note is that the decrease in revenue was not as substantial as the decrease you saw in transactions. Part of that reason was because you were forced to implement larger toll increases during that period to help keep some of that revenue afloat. So that's why you may see differences in those trend lines. But since the recession, what's been consistent is you've actually, even though you had that stagnant transactional growth, you have seen strong revenue for the entire period coming out of the recession. What's been interesting is because of the recent refinancing, you no longer have the need to implement some of the larger toll increases we saw back in 2010, 2011, 2012 to maintain this revenue growth. In the past several years, with transaction growth being as strong as it's been, we've been able to adopt an inflationary toll increase policy with much smaller increases, though consistent year over year. Moving to the San Joaquin, you'll hear a lot of the exact same stories. Again, looking at the trends since the facility opened, extremely strong growth through the beginning of the recession. Transactions were obviously very negatively impacted during the recession, and a similar story to what you've seen on the Foothill, with a couple years of little to no growth followed by some really substantial growth over the last few years. Interestingly enough, on the San Joaquin, the high point that you hit in August of this past year, you're about 95% of the high point you were in the history of the facility. So if you see where that navy blue line peaks around August 2007 versus where you peaked in August 2015, you are almost back to an all-time transactional high point. Similarly, on the revenue side, growth through the 2000s. Again, a decrease during the recession, not as significant as the transactional loss due to toll increases, but your revenue growth coming out of the recession has been outstanding. You've really seen stronger growth since the recession in your San Joaquin revenue than you saw prior to the recession. Similar to the Foothill Eastern, with the recent refinancing, obviously you're in a much better position to minimize the toll increases, stay around an inflationary impact, to hopefully foster, that continued transaction growth, driving that revenue growth. So overall, what have we seen in fiscal year since the fiscal year with the fiscal year 2016 toll increase response? So transactions overall on the Foothill Eastern are actually up 10%. That's a very, very great result. Normally, when you implement any sort of toll increase, you can expect some loss in transactions. But really, just because of the burgeoning economy, you saw tremendous transactional growth. Revenues are up 13% year over year. And then a breakdown of where you're seeing that transaction growth. So your peak period transactions are up 7%. But I think what's more interesting is that you're seeing off-peak and weekend growth in almost double digits, which basically shows that the road is not just a benefit to your commuter base, to your peak period travel. You've got a lot of people who are now choosing to use the facility for their non-discretionary trips, for shopping trips, or because they really just see it as a viable alternative. So that's a really, really strong conclusion for the facility. Similar patterns on the San Joaquin. Overall transactions are up 11%, revenue is up 14%, and you see a similar trend here as far as the distribution by time of day. Peak transactions are up, that's great, that's really the lifeblood of the facility, but the fact that you're seeing that off-peak and that weekend growth is really, really strong, and that's a really, really positive sign. So I want to talk a little bit about our traffic and revenue forecast, how we help set toll rates for the budgetary process, and how we build what we call the optimal revenue curve. So toll elasticity is similar to most basic economic supply and demand. What we're showing here is a chart of how traffic works. So you have the toll rate charged across the x-axis, and you have basically the traffic volume across the y-axis. And as a surprise to no one, you see as you raise the toll rate, traffic decreases. Now, depending on what that rate of increase is, the rate of decline changes, and that's what's called elasticity. So you can see here as an example, if you have a toll rate that's set at a quarter and you increase it to 50 cents, traffic will decline by 10%. So that's a certain rate of elasticity. Basically utilizing that toll rate and traffic, you can chart here what's basically called a revenue curve. So you see, at 25 cents, you get 100 vehicles, so you make $25. At 50 cents, you have 90 vehicles, you make $45. At $1, you have 72, and so on. And so you can basically create a curve that looks just like that. Now, what's interesting about that is at the low end of the revenue curve, revenue increases almost linearly with toll increases. So the differential from someone paying a quarter to 50 cents is probably not a significant impact to them, so the loss in traffic is not expected to be significant. But as you get to the top of the curve, what ends up happening is the higher your toll rates, the more traffic you're driving away, and the benefit on the revenue side lessens and lessens. And there's actually a point that's called the revenue maximization point, and this is really at a certain toll rate that's where you're generating the maximum amount of revenue. And if you charge a rate that's over that maximum revenue, you're actually losing money. So you've reached a point where the rate of return is now negative. So your rates are so high that every additional cent that you charge, you're driving more traffic away than revenue you're gaining. So we usually define 2 points on that revenue curve. Point A is what we call the maximum revenue curve, and point B is what we usually call our optimal toll. And we really want to be somewhere about 10 to 15% below that revenue max toll. You know, we want to set your rates in a circumstance where if you have increased traffic growth, or let's say you have another recession, you actually have the ability to raise rates to gain a little bit more revenue. If you are at that maximum revenue point, it really limits your flexibility moving forward to raise rates if you need to cover debt service, because any raise in rates will actually lead to less revenue. What's also interesting about this curve is that when you look at decreasing toll rates, you will lose money. When we set that optimal toll rate, I mean, what these curves show is that while lowering rates may bring back traffic, the amount you lower the rate will not bring back enough traffic to generate additional revenue. So this is all part of the exercise that we go through when we look to set rates, by plaza or by main line or by ramp. Any questions on that?
Which I'm discouraging.
Okay. So now I'd like to talk a little about what we're seeing on the economy and its impact on toll road usage. I've shown a couple charts here, and the colors may be a little hard to discern, but basically what we look at is, population and employment densities, basically where do people live and where are their jobs. That's your biggest driver of traffic in the region. The map on the left shows what the density was in 2012 in Orange County and what we have in 2015. And there are a few areas that are a little darker, and again, it may be a little hard to discern on a small screen, but what we're basically showing is that a lot of the increase in population density is happening next to the toll facilities. Between the 133 and the 261 in North Irvine, you see a lot of increased density between 12 and 15. North of the 73 up near Costa Mesa, you're starting to see increased density there. So the fact that a lot of the population and household growth is occurring right around your toll facilities is a strong driver, again, of increased ridership growth. Similarly, employment. A lot of the same patterns. I mean, you're seeing a lot of densification happening up in the Irvine Spectrum area, basically right at the base of the 133. Increased densification in downtown Irvine and near the airport, which is part of what's driving growth on the 73. So really, a lot of the county, where it's densifying is in advantageous places for increasing toll road usage. So these are two charts of vehicle miles of travel, and vehicle miles of travel is essentially the number of cars on the road times the miles that they drive. And I always like to start with the chart on the top left, which shows what's happened VMT nationally. And from basically 1970 to 2007, you can see that that's a 2% growth per year trend line. There's tiny little leveling off of VMT during some of the recessionary periods, but for all intents and purposes, it basically grew 2% for 40 years. What happened during the recession was unprecedented, where we actually saw a decline in national VMT. And coming out of the recession, we saw this leveling of VMT. And there was a lot of narratives, there are a lot of narratives that started to form that people don't want to drive anymore. Everybody wants to move into the cities. Urban densification is happening again. Millennials don't want cars. Everybody works remotely. And I think it was a couple years ago I stood here and said, I don't necessarily buy into that as the full explanation. And I think what's interesting is over the last year, you've seen a return to growth in national VMT. It's a little bit lower than the 2% we saw for 40 years. So it's hard to say that there's not some reurbanization, some impact of that. But I think what's really happened is that recession caused an overall shift in economics amongst people that maybe they're forming families later than life. You're graduating college, you're not getting the same high-paying job, so you can't afford to buy a single-family home 2 years out of college, 3 years out of college. So I think what we're seeing is there was a delay in a lot of that increase in VMT. And I think over the next year, it'll be very interesting to see if that upward trend continues. I'm sure everybody that, you all live in Orange County, you all felt that congestion's worse on the freeways. It certainly doesn't seem like people are driving less now, I'm sure. And the numbers in California really back that up. The chart on the bottom right graphs national VMT versus VMT in California. And that blue line is the state of California. And you can see in 2013, it was less than the national average by a significant amount, and now it's almost past the national average. So the growth in VMT in California over the last 3 years has been astronomical. Gas prices. So this chart in navy blue shows average gas price in Los Angeles. It's the closest reported gas prices that you can get to Orange County versus the national average. As I started to talk about a little bit, what's interesting is you can see that the drop on the national side happened a little bit earlier than what's happened in Los Angeles. Now, I know there were some refinery issues out here that probably kept prices a little elevated, but we are seeing this downward trend that's really having, like I said, a short-term impact on gas. So this is something we've definitely been keeping a close eye on, and we've been trying to tie some of the monthly gains to this gas price decrease. But again, what we found is that even between 2014 and 2015, you can see gas prices in LA were increasing pretty rapidly. You were showing strong transactional growth on the facilities here. So while I do think there is some short-term bump that you get, that growth that you've seen in the last 2 years is certainly not directly correlated to the recent drop in gas prices. But again, it'll be interesting to track this over the next year to see, are we going to see some sustained periods at these lower rates, or is this a temporary impact? Metro area employment is another thing that we like to track, and what we're showing here is basically 5 large metro areas in California. San Jose and San Francisco and at the top in the light blue and the red, and then LA in the dark blue, Orange County in orange, and the Inland Empire in green. And I think what's really interesting here is what we did is this graph is an index. So what we did was we indexed to 2007. 2007 was basically the height of employment in LA, Orange County, and the Inland Empire. So what we wanted to show was how's the recovery of jobs doing in these areas. And what you can see is if you look all the way over in 2016, all 3 lines are now over that 1.0 threshold. So you've actually, all of the jobs that were lost during the recession have been recovered, and you've actually now exceeded those job totals, which were the highest in the reported history of Orange County. So there are more jobs today in Orange County than there have ever been. And that's true also of the Inland Empire, and it's true of Los Angeles. Home prices. So the value of home price is also a really big factor in people's decisions to use toll roads. Whether or not the current value of your home puts an extra dollar in your pocket, it definitely has an impact on what you feel is your overall wealth. So when we were in the low point of the recession and then the slow recovery, we were seeing some of that stagnant growth because I think housing prices had also stagnated. What I'm showing here, Orange County is the top line in red, Los Angeles in blue, Inland Empire in green. And the high point of housing values, 2007 in Orange County, the average median home price was about $700,000. It now exceeds $700,000. In Los Angeles, it was $518,000. You're now almost back there. Inland Empire is $360,000. You're still trailing a little bit there, only about $334,000. But really what we've seen is a full recovery in housing values in Southern California. Housing permits. So this is essentially a metric of construction. And what I'd really like to focus on is the red bars, which is Orange County. And 2 things really stick out about this to me. So from 2007, you can see the amount of new construction that was occurring in Orange County on the left side of the graphic. And if you compare the building that was going on in the county in 2007 to what's happened in 2013, 2014, 2015, you can see that year over year, the number of housing permits issued has been much higher in the past 3 years than it was even at the height of the economic expansion. And I think what's even more important is the ratio of the dark red to the light red. So the dark red represents permits for single-family homes. The light red represents multifamily homes. So what the fact that those multifamily home bars being so high represents is density. So there is increased housing density occurring in Orange County as more multifamily apartment style, construction is happening. So that when you have a multifamily unit, obviously you're bringing even more people into the region. More people equals more cars. So this is, again, just the fact of ongoing home construction, very significant in Orange County. So in conclusion, I think I've talked enough about the strong economic growth, but that's really been a driving characteristic of all of the increases on both facilities. I think the off-peak and weekend growth that's outpacing peak period growth is substantial. And as we talked about, I think some of the recent performance could be buoyed by the lower gas prices. I don't think it's really the driving force behind it, but certainly something that we're keeping our eyes on.
Okay.
Any questions?
Stephen, we do.
Sure.
Director Pruitt and Director Spitzer.
Want to know if you could comment on impact of technology. For instance, as we know our young ridership will probably utilize the toll calculator we can find on our website. Do you see that as having any impact, or would you be measuring anything like that in terms of traffic and revenue studies?
I think, as far as one of the things that we have seen in our past analyses as far as what impacts ridership on the toll rate side is if tolls are not readily apparent. And I think that the fact that it's a published schedule that someone can go on and look at the toll calculator, and the fact that you have so many, the base of your ridership is largely a commuter base, I think that most people know what they're paying on the road before they use it. So I don't see any major impact in items like the toll calculator. What I see as being on the technology side actually a benefit to the toll facilities is all of the mobile applications that are now available to make real-time decisions on facility choice and travel time routes. And what's interesting is, our traffic models basically assume everybody is 100% educated. And we're getting closer and closer to that being a reality with the fact that you can, go on Waze and find out in real time, the impact of taking the toll road and its benefits.
You're quite right about that. I was just going to mention it's the discretionary number that keeps increasing, is why I brought that up. It's not just the commuter, but as we see more people using it for discretionary.
Well, I think the fact that you're seeing that discretionary growth, shows you that people are finding the benefits of the toll facility to be, not just a travel time benefit. They're better maintained than the freeway system. There's less trucks to deal with. A lot of the surveys we run, there's people that comment the view is fantastic. Just not sitting in bumper-to-bumper traffic is worthwhile. So I think what you're seeing is a lot of people starting to realize that, there's a lot of ancillary benefits to using the toll roads in off-peak periods that's not completely travel time based. And I think a lot of the burgeoning economics are driving, their ability to make that economic choice a more viable one.
Okay, Director Spitzer, then Director Martinez.
Do you mind commenting quickly about the difference in toll setting policy between the two agencies, please?
The other agency being OCTA?
No.
San Joaquin.
Yeah, we have two different
Yes.
ways we establish tolls based upon the indenture on the San Joaquin.
Well, with the refinancing, I think both are basically assuming inflationary increases going forward. So I know in the past we had very different ways of looking at the toll rate structure, but I think with the refinancing of the San Joaquin, they've become consistent.
That's not what I mean.
Okay.
Why did you get up? You worried about my question?
I think Steve answered it correctly, but the refinancing changed all of that, so now they are consistent. Whereas we did have a situation with the San Joaquin in the past where we were required to utilize the
So that was wiped out in the last refi?
It was, yes.
Okay, thank you.
Director Martinez, then Director Hack.
Thank you. I have two questions. One, because we were talking about technology, and I'm definitely love technology and use it quite often. And when I'm on the toll roads, and I take it quite frequently now because I have to travel a lot, I use Waze a lot. And so there's a lot of, marketing happening there. And I know when you're looking at surcharges, for example, even Uber and Lyft, as someone that takes that a lot as well, I know when I'm going to take it or not, or if I'm just going to pay the surcharge, because specifically in Los Angeles, it seems like the surcharge is always on now. And so, when you're looking at, your iPhone, you're looking, do I take that or do I take a taxi that's just right around the corner? And so for us, you have Uber and Lyft actually that are using the toll roads. And so how can we create some kind of incentive working with these kinds of companies? Because if you don't have the traditional user that's using the toll road, and you have, these companies like Uber and Lyft that are picking up folks to use the toll roads, I'm not sure if we've actually are tracking that. Are we working with those companies? But because I think more and more so, you're starting to see more folks in Orange County using Uber and Lyft. And as you see that skyrocket in Los Angeles or in San Francisco. And so I think it's some important, information that we should gather. as we move forward, because I think you're going to see more and more ridership, specifically when people are using Uber and Lyft and going onto toll roads because they're trying to get to a location quite fast. And I make mention of that because I was in Washington, D.C. last month, and going from Dulles, I used an Uber, and they had the Toll Road Express, so it saved me 25 minutes versus someone else that didn't have that. And so I gave the guy a $10 tip because he was able to get me there much quicker. And so I think as we continue to look at our system, making sure that we're becoming more innovative, but working with these partners like Uber and Lyft. And my second question.
But Michelle, that was a long first question.
Oh, I know.
We need a little bit.
Okay.
No, go ahead. What's your second question?
My second question is just a brief one. As we look at the technology, and you're going on to the on the ramps for the toll roads, and this was to a prior presentation, and I agree with Ms. Caruth, but I think it's very difficult when you're getting onto those paths. I see the 110 Express in Los Angeles, and so you have those marquees that actually show you the price, and so it's when you're going through there, you already know what you're going to be paying because you see that, and then you're going to the second they're charging you, know what you're going to pay. For us, I don't think we have not made the investments in some of those digital boards, and I'm not sure, the relationship that we have here at the table here with Caltrans. Do we continue to move in that direction, like the 110 Express? Is the other question when you're looking at how much you're going to be paying. I understand too that some people may not want to take it, but when you're on the system already, you're not going to get off.
Right.
So
I'll give a brief answer. I think question 1 is probably a Lisa question, and question 2 might be a Dave question. But regarding technologies such as Uber and Lyft, I don't know if the regulations are the same here, but I can say in the New York City area, all Uber drivers are required to have an Easy Pass, which I think is a huge benefit to having them use the facility. Is the fact if every Uber driver has already a fast track, I think that's a great first step in encouraging their usage of the facilities. Lisa, I don't know if you want to talk more about partnerships.
I can tell you an initiative that's on our list to work on that. I do know that Uber drivers, Lyft drivers use the one-time toll function online. I've heard that, but it is a list of something for us that we're looking to tackle. And we do actually do advertising on Uber, and then we'll go into the details of that, where it comes up if you're near the road, that's an option.
Let me add to that too. As part of our data analytics, we did have our consultant approach Uber and Lyft to try, and they would not share data with us. So we can get it in the overall data, but we can't get discreetly to find out their usage and things like that. And I guess the other thing is we advertise on Lyft and Waze as well.
Waze, actually Waze we do, I'm sorry, not Waze, we advertise on.
And regarding the posting of rates, I think one of the interesting things is when you make a comparison to LA, very different functionality of an express lane versus a generic toll facility. The way the express lanes operate is that you're measuring your direct competitor, which is right next to you, and you're basically changing your toll rates depending on how much traffic's in the general purpose lanes. If you were to try to utilize something like that, what's the direct competitor? It really depends by lane. It depends on exactly which facility you're on, which leg you're on. So I think it's a little more difficult. Yeah, so and I think particularly when you look at publishing a range of rates, there's so many different potential entry and exits on a system like the Foothill Eastern that I think as Dave stated, if you put something that said 50 cents to $10, someone might think I might get charged $10 for a very short trip, even though that's the longest trip on the system. So I think part of what you don't want to do is confuse riders as to where they fall within that range of rates, because there are any number of different OD patterns that they could use on the facility that are going to lead to those different rates. But I don't know, Dave, if you want to add anything.
That's probably enough for right now. Directors, okay. We have closed session coming up, and I want to make sure we don't lose directors for the closed session. So I've got Director Hack and then Director Shea.
Yeah, as to the ridership up in LA, for instance, you were also talking about numbers in the car. You've got a selector switch there, so the numbers are flowing even further than that. Mm-hmm. But for me, the question really is, you talked to me about areas where we're building people on the 73 various high points in Orange County. I'd like to really know the distinction between those who are riding it for Orange County purposes and those who are going up to LA. I'd like to see those numbers because I think they are not necessarily the same people.
You're talking specifically on the 73?
Well, you can go either way for me, but of course, you're gonna have to come in and do what, but I think the 73, frankly.
Yeah, we can actually produce that data. I think several years ago, we looked at something like that, and about 15%, if I'm remembering correctly, of the ridership on the 73 travels actually from San Diego to LA. So there is a significant percent that are really through trips between counties outside of Orange, but it's you know, a lot of trips that originate or are destined to Orange County as well.
Come out from Orange County to LA, excluding San Diego.
I mean, we can produce those numbers. I don't know them off the top of your head, and we can do the same on the Foothill Eastern with Inland Empire versus Orange County.
Good, thank you. Director Shea.
Yes, just a brief question. Thank you very much. Very good information. Just this discussion you brought up about the off-peak usage on our roads. I thought that was quite interesting, how that we're really starting to realize more revenue. Where in the past have we experienced that, or have we? Is this just some nuance that has just come forward, or what's our history?
In the past, you've seen stronger peak period growth than off-peak. There's usually been off-peak growth as well, but I think this is the first year I can remember, and certainly the past 5 or 6, where off-peak has really outpaced peak period growth. So I have all those numbers. I can certainly provide those, but this was the first year that I remember seeing off-peak and weekend growing much faster than what we saw in the peak periods.
So going forward, you see us sustaining this? Is that something that, when you're modeling this, that you see that something we can look forward to, or?
Yeah, I think, I mean, as long as the underlying economics of the region stay strong, what's going to happen is your toll-free alternatives are going to continue to get worse, and those peak periods where congestion's so bad is going to continue to creep into the off-peaks.
And then just one last follow-up, because on the weekends, so much of the time I still see our freeways very crowded anyway. Do you think that's contributing to that as well?
Certainly, yeah. I mean,
Okay.
that's definitely part of it as well. I know, we've looked at weekend travel on the 5 and the 405 paralleling the 73, and there's some significant congestion on Saturday afternoons, which I think is really, driving people to the 73 as an alternative.
Thank you.
Director Beal.
The slides you had up relative to toll elasticity, one of the most important, one of the most controversial issues that we all have to deal with here is when we do toll increases, recognizing we're coming into budget season. Can you give us a heads up? Are we looking at mere inflationary increases versus trying to reach the optimal place on the revenue curve?
That's actually a perfect transition. If you want to advance to Amy's slide, I think that's the topic of her slide.
I was tricked, we're not through.
And actually, if you do have more questions for Steve, but I think we can just jump in real quick and get into this next piece. So our next steps here are to complete our analysis. And so what we do as part of that process each year is we start with a baseline that is a no toll increase so that we can see the actual expected transaction and revenue growth for the next year. And then that helps us compare to the toll rate scenarios that we develop. And so what we are looking at for this year, and what we've asked Steve to run, is that we are looking at an inflationary increase of 2%, which is the approximate average inflationary increase in both of the financing documents. So that would mirror what we were expecting to do within our financings. And then the other two scenarios that we have listed here were some suggestions that we had received last year at the end of the budget process. And so we've asked Steve to run those as well. The mainline increase would apply to both agencies, so looking at that rather than any of the ramps. And then for the Foothill Eastern, looking at a larger increase at Windy Ridge, as opposed to other increases throughout the system. So those are the scenarios that we've asked Stantec to run at this point, and we would plan then to present those results to you at the workshop on April 20th in context of the entire budget, so showing you all of the revenues and expenditures that we're proposing.
Okay, Director Spitzer.
Tony, were you done? Tony?
Yeah, no, thank you. Toll elasticity, whether we increase or not, generally, big picture, I always like to try and run whatever agency I'm fortunate enough to represent, kind of like a business, really with accountability. But the whole concept of toll elasticity is a situation that I struggle with just a little, because just because we can raise our tolls without diverting an undue amount of people. Doesn't necessarily mean we should, because we are a government agency. And so it's a balancing of interests that we all need to do. We obviously need to make sure that we provide for the revenue that this agency needs to meet all of its financial and other obligations. But we have commitments and obligations to our residents, and there's policy decisions. Do we want to make the roads available for more and more people? You know, how much is enough? And it's something that I struggle with. And sometimes I feel like we get the information, the presentation, and we're supposed to vote on it like the same day, and we never have had that policy discussion. So I just kind of wanted to put it out there, because every time we raise rates, we hit that optimal place on the toll elasticity. You know, we've diverted a few, we've lost a few, but you know, we're still going to increase revenue. Just keep in mind that everyone that we've diverted is a former customer who's probably going away with some bad feelings. And there's a lot of bad feelings just in the community in general based upon the historical increase in tolls. We've lost a lot of people. It's one thing I hear all the time about how expensive our roads are. It doesn't impact those that are riding it because they've made the financial calculation. It works for me. But for all those that it doesn't work for, it's a growing body of people that there's resentment, and we need to take that into account.
Good. And my guess is the workshop's probably a better forum for us to be able to have a more complete discussion. Director Spitzer, do you have a question?
Well, Director Beal, I think we have. I mean, my recollection of all these discussions is we've been presented various scenarios based upon where the curves intersect and the elasticity of demand, and we've generally priced somewhere below that intersection, being very cognizant of diversion as opposed to our fiduciary obligation, which is to pay the debt. I don't think we've ever voted as a board, in my recent memory, to maximize revenue as opposed to ensure that the toll numbers we hit are consistent with what our obligations are under the indenture. But I think it's an important discussion, and based upon what Director Beal has said, I would just hope we would have that information right sooner rather than later, so we could think about it before we come to the workshop. Is that going to be possible, Steve? Because you've always given us scenarios. You've never just said you have to do this.
Right. We try to put it in context. If there are specific scenarios or input, I mean, how should we proceed, Mike?
I think we'll look at that and we are going to have to balance the value of keeping it in context and what we are able to provide ahead of time.
I have no idea what you just said. Keeping it in context, but
at the workshop, when we're able to present it, we're able to put in context what we're presenting.
Like the revenue impact, so showing, yes, of course, we always look at the impact on transactions, but also on revenue, and then showing you the entire budget, so all of the revenues, all the expenses, and what that means. I mean, yes, Steve's right that we'll have numbers that we'll be vetting and we'll be putting together as part of that presentation. There is still time after the April 20th to make changes, and that's the point of the workshop. And if there's any feedback you'd like to give us today that we can run to present to you, we would certainly like to do that.
I don't know. My only point was, I thought you've always done a good job giving us your recommendation and then showing us various options. But what we have to be careful of as directors is we don't pick and choose to, you can really disturb the model. So, okay, that is what it is. What, Mike?
That's the context.
Mike, I don't know what context. If it doesn't speak for itself, then I think there's a problem, right? When you get a document or a PowerPoint, it should speak for itself. If you have to explain to me what it means to give me context, then maybe the slide doesn't do a good job. I think I should be able to, we should all be able to study something and understand what the point is. My question is timing. Stantec is doing the TNR, the investment grade TNR for the 24191 Connect. We are talking about the CEQA document for that now, and then we're going to talk about at some point public outreach, and then we also have a lot of work to do with OCTA, which we've been talking about a lot. If you talk about a large increase at Windy Ridge at the detriment or expense of avoiding specific toll plaza increases, you may start a discussion about Windy Ridge and those users at the same time you're trying to build support for a 24191 Connect for the same population. So you're going to have people who we're asking to support that project, I would hope, because I think most of us are supportive of it, at least in theory at this point, and then have people against us because they're offended that we are targeting the same population on who use Windy Ridge. So maybe you could give me some context about that dialogue.
That was a suggestion that was given to us from the board last year during the budget process. So that's
But we weren't having the discussion in the same context, nor I don't think people were probably thinking front and center about the 24191 Connect and the timing of the Stantec investment study. So when we have our context discussion, maybe we can make sure we put in appropriate context, that discussion.
No, and that's true, and part of the incentive for us as staff to add that in is because we feel just the way you articulated that because of the backup that we have northbound Windy Ridge, we think we have a real customer issue there, and we would not recommend doing this, but since it had been asked, we wanted to be prepared to provide the context for the discussion related to an isolated increase at Windy Ridge.
Okay, but when I see the slide today without more, it worries me a little bit because if Stantec is being asked to look at a 4% at Windy Ridge, which is I think the direction you gave him, right? He's modeling that. Is that fair?
He hasn't started yet. We just wanted to share with you where we thought we were going, and it's an approximate a larger increase at Windy Ridge to see what answer we would get when we asked that question.
And in light of the fact that we are going to have a TNR for the same population that used that segment, is it still wise to study a larger increase at Windy Ridge? Why would Steve do that work if we wouldn't do, I don't think I could, I don't know, but why would you support raising Windy Ridge at the same time you're asking people to buy into the 24191 Connect and the additional toll they would be facing there?
We wouldn't, but since the question was asked, we wanted to have the data available if that discussion comes up again in the budget process.
No, your point's well taken. So my question is, revisiting it, that's why we have these discussions. Should we do that? Is there benefit to doing that? Because it's going to cost us money to have Stantec model an additional increase at Windy Ridge.
And if I may, I think I heard Amy ask for input as to what we would like to have you model, so I think you've clearly heard that is an important part of the conversation.
Mr. Chair.
Just a second, Todd, anything else?
I think somebody should explain, in light of all these moving parts, here now, take 5 minutes, think about it, whatever, but somebody should tell us what you think you're going to do in these moving parts going into budget so we don't inadvertently alienate ourselves from a populations whose support we will need on the 24191 Connect. I don't know how that all fits together. That's, I guess, my point. I don't get it. So somebody needs a comment on it.
Okay, and I think it is an important question, but are you prepared to comment now, or do you want to think about it more than the 5 minutes? Because I do want to get us to closed session. We have to make sure we maintain our quorum and our majority for closed session before I start to lose directors.
Well, I think I would recommend that if the board prefers us not to run this scenario, that's what we would like to do, because as Mike mentioned, we were just trying to respond to a request that we heard last year.
A year ago, right.
And so I don't think we actually support it either. And so if the board prefers us not to run that scenario, that's what we would like to do.
Yeah, it's not about whether we support or not support, it's having the data to answer the questions we anticipate will come to us.
Sure. I think having the data is going to be a good thing, given there was a direction a year ago, and to shorten the conversation now, how about we bring back both if we could? I have two more directors, Director Beal and then Director Voits, and then folks, we need to get to closed session. So Director Beal, please.
Briefly, there was a fair amount of talk just now about context. Part of the context, part of the information that I would like the board to see would be not just focused on where we are today and why, but I'd like to see an historical reference on a percentage basis to the amount of toll increases that have occurred in the past, so that we just have that full picture, because that's the picture, maybe not understood to the third decimal point, but it's in the mind of every one of our constituents in terms of the toll increases historically, and I think it's important information for us to see historically how much our tolls have increased. And I think that's information that's been presented in past years. I want to make sure we have that in a timely way so that we could calculate make our own calculations about what's being proposed for this year.
Thank you. Director Boyce.
I too want to clarify that, that the larger increase at Windy Ridge would, I think that's just a misstatement. The constituents that I represent from the city of Lake Forest aren't going to appreciate that when they've seen that 2% on the other toll plazas. And then what's the difference between the inflationary increase at 2% at all plazas and the mainline increase of 2.5%? Maybe that's something that you can clarify more at the discussion. But the Windy Ridge 4%, I think it's unfair for the people that are.
The scenario for the mainline increase would be a scenario where only the main lines were increased by 2.5% and the ramps were not increased at all. And so that replaces the scenario of inflationary increase of 2% at all locations.
And so in the drive from south 241 at Osos to the 91, what would the cost increase be? Would it be a larger increase if you took just the main line straight through?
You would be, the rate would increase at the main lines only. So if you.
Without at the off ramps?
Right, correct.
Okay, thank you.
Just real quickly.
Director Shake.
Yeah, just quickly. We went through a very lengthy review of all kind of scenarios less than a year ago. Why can't we use that data? Didn't we have all those different many scenarios?
We do this every year. So
I know we do, but I don't know. What's the differential from him doing? I mean, how much different would it be? 12. So you think it would be a lot different because the increase in traffic, or what? Maybe you can answer that.
Yeah, essentially what we're doing is recalibrating the model to have another year of actual data in it. So given the large transaction growth you've seen over the past year, that's going to factor in, whereas in past years, the assumption might have been a little more restrained because we hadn't seen that level of transaction growth.
And what's the cost to do this, Mike? Or what would be the cost?
I think the total budget exercise is $40,000.
Oh, geez.
And if
For
you do the
just
gas
enough?
prices, it would be higher, apparently, right? After gas prices. All right, directors, if I may, we need to get to the closed session. This is a non-action item. This is a receive and file, so no need for taking a vote on that. Steve, thank you. Amy, thank you very much. Mr. Joseph, would you please announce our closed session?
Yes, Mr. Chair, we will be conferring with legal counsel in closed session regarding existing litigation. The two matters listed in the agenda. We do not anticipate reportable action.
Okay, very good. We are moving to closed session in the other room. Directors, I told Chairman Chun we would have him over there at 11:30. So if you take 4 minutes to work your way over, but be prepared for that. We will start promptly at 11:30. Thank you.